bill, it is essential and vital to our national security. Again, thank you, the gentlewoman from Arizona, for the work that you're doing, and thank you, Chairman McCall.
Well, again, thank you, Mr. Carter, for your comments. And again, thanks for coming to visit my community and listen to the residents there that are dealing with this, having that ear and be coming back as an advocate and a leader on this issue. And thanks for supporting this bill. Really appreciate it. Mr. Palmer from Alabama, would you like to join the conversation?
I would, and I want to thank the gentlewoman from Arizona for the work you've done on this. I know this has been I don't want to say a labor of love, but you have an incredible sense of urgency. And I think perhaps more than anyone that I've been involved with, a sense of how important this is. I want to talk a little bit about the fence. And like the gentleman from Georgia, I have been to the border before, but not in the context of examining our border security. And I'm a strong proponent of the fence. I have been all along. But what this trip opened my eyes to is the fact that the fence by itself is not enough. It's an impediment. Right. One of the things that was impressed upon me on this trip was the sophistication of the cartels and the people across the border in breaching our fence and breaching our security. There's some pretty serious engineering going on here. When we were in San Diego, for instance, we saw where we have double layer fencing. We've got the metal mat, landing mat fence on the Mexico side. We've got the heavy gauge fence with the razor wire at the top on the U.S. side. And they're using hardened blades for laser saws. It literally takes 1 minute to cut through there. Right. All along that fence, you saw where it was patched and what the Border Patrol calls doggy doors. They cut it out in 3 places, push it open, and they're through. And the interesting thing is there, you've got 3 million people in Tijuana on the Mexico side. You've got 3 million in San Diego. Almost the minute they're through, they're assimilated. But the thing that's going on there is the cooperation between local law enforcement, the Coast Guard, the Border Patrol, and how diligent they are to be there immediately once that line is breached to interdict that. And they've been so effective at it that they're now pushing these folks offshore. They're using the Ponga boats now. And the Coast Guard, working with the Border Patrol and local law enforcement, have been so good at interdicting that they're forcing them up the coast of California. That's not the case in Arizona.
Right, exactly.
And what people need to understand is that just building the fence and pulling back and thinking that's going to stop them. I don't care how high we build it, how wide we build it, how many layers we have. If we don't have people in forward operating positions to interdict these people when they're staging to come across, we're not going to stop them. The picture that you're showing there next to you is the fence in Arizona, and the attention was drawn to where they'd cut through the mesh there. That's not the thing that got my attention. If you'll notice there, those are 6-inch I-beams supported by 6-inch channel. That's 1/4-inch carbon steel. That's all along that border. They came along there with these hardened blades, laser saws, cut through the I-beam, cut through the channel, folded over, ramped over, and drove trucks over it.
Right.
Now, this was not reported in the national media. I'm not sure it was that there was any discussion about it from this administration. It was the local media that picked up on it. The ranchers know about this, but I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they said there have been 47 vehicles crossed over that. These are pickup trucks loaded with drugs and other items, contraband, whether it's guns or drugs or human trafficking. But that's the issue.
If the gentleman will yield, I'll elaborate a little bit on that. That was on Mr. Ladd's ranch less than 2 weeks ago where we saw that, and they showed where they ramped over. According to Mr. Ladd, there's been 47 drive-thrus on his ranching area in the last about 2.5 years. And that particular case was caught by the Sierra Vista Police, which is a town a little bit further inland, because the truck just didn't look right. It was way down. Its wheels looked a little funny. And they got about $600,000 worth of marijuana, 2,000 pounds of marijuana they caught on that vehicle alone. So that's just an example of what's happening.
Well, think about the staging that had to take place for that. That a vehicle that heavy to be able to cross that fence. Obviously, and the interesting thing is they used our own I-beam and channel to support the ramps that would bear that weight for that truck to get over. This is not a static situation. Just building the fence is not enough. We've got to have the aerial surveillance, the unmanned aircraft, the aerostats, looking into Mexico and seeing the staging that takes place for an operation like that to take place. You've been in the military, you understand this, that if you're going to, it literally looked like a military operation where they cut this down and ramped over it and drove over it.
Yep.
If we're looking into Mexico and see that, we need people in forward operating bases that can react immediately, not 20 minutes later, not 30 minutes later, because they're already over and gone. So this has got to be a combination of things. I'm fine with the fence. We can build the fence as high and wide and as long as we want to, but we've got to be able to interdict. We've got to be able to see them staging because they're not carrying ramping material on their backs for 3 or 4 miles to the fence. This happened fairly close to the fence, and we should have been able to see that and stop it. The other issue is the morale and the fact that we are not doing anything about catch and release has really hurt the morale, I think, with our law enforcement and with our Border Patrol. And it definitely has hurt the morale of the ranchers. My heart really goes out to those guys. They've been there through many generations. They've put in their blood, sweat, and tears in this. And it's not just that they love their ranch, they love their country. And it was very evident in what they had to say. I think it's incumbent upon us as members of Congress to do our duty to protect the border. And the other thing is, again, going back to the morale, it's different in San Diego, it's different in Arizona, it's different in Texas. What we need to do, and I'm very grateful for the work that's being done to bring alongside this bill, an enforcement bill. We've got to do this, I think, in a way that makes sense to the American people. Build a fence, secure the border, but have the right enforcement that goes along with this, that makes the work that our Border Patrol is doing worthwhile. It's that when they catch the bad guys, they need to be able to. There ought to be some consequences for it. And earlier, Mr. Perry from Pennsylvania made this point about when you're forward deployed in a combat zone, you secure your perimeter. There are consequences if you cross that perimeter. A little more lethal than would be here, but in all honesty, we have got to do these things together. I applaud you for the work you're doing. It is extremely important, and I look forward to working with you on this.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. I appreciate it. And just to elaborate a little bit on what my colleague was talking about, the challenge we have, the men and women in Border Patrol are doing the best they can. I mean, they're my constituents as well. I really appreciate them every day putting on the uniform and doing the job that they're doing. But the strategy is not working for those who live in these rural areas near the border. And we need a strategy that pushes our intelligence deeper south of the border, using intelligence-driven operations so that we can use some of these airborne assets and radars in order to detect the cartel activity, detect the movement, monitor the movement, and then these forward operating bases are critical. The bill, in consultation with the chairman, they agreed to add in 2 forward operating bases in Tucson to get the Border Patrol operating right at the border so that we can either prevent the activity or they can very quickly respond to it when they see a breach happening. Challenging response times if they're further inland or in some of the tougher terrain. So some of the things that I added into an amendment to address this issue is related to the fact that right now they're focused on defense in depth. So sometimes we're seeing mules and traffickers, and I'll show a picture here. Oftentimes, 30, 40, 50 miles inland. You can see this is just one example of a mule with packs on their backs. And so they're trafficking across private property while they're moving into the defense in depth strategy, and that's just not working. So we've got to get the Border Patrol closer to the border. I offered an amendment. I'm glad the committee agreed to it, to get the Border Patrol closer to the border, have them patrolling on the south side of John Ladd's Ranch and not on the north side, have those forward operating bases manned to the max extent possible, and also developing a quick reaction capability so that when we see the activity happening, they can quickly get, especially in these areas of tough terrain, to stop the activity or intercept it as soon as possible when it comes over to the border. Because this, again, if they're coming through Mr. Ladd's Ranch and some of the other ranchers, they don't know who it is, they don't know if they're armed, they don't know what their intentions are, and it puts them at risk on a daily basis. So,
one other thing to that, it's very important in this bill is this would allow access through federal lands, and it has created a huge impediment for Border Patrol in the interdiction of people like this, whether they're coming across on foot or coming across in vehicles, if our Border Patrol do not have access to roads through federal land. So that is another very important component of this bill. And then last thing, down in Texas, we've got this Caruso cane on the banks of the river that basically is a natural hiding place for people who are crossing the river. We've got to allow our Border Patrol to take whatever measures are necessary to eliminate those type natural hiding places and barriers to interdiction. So all of this is extremely important. I'm glad you put that picture up, because I don't think people fully appreciate when you talk about people bringing drugs across the border, the massive amounts that can cross just on the backs of individuals.
Exactly.
I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Now I yield to my colleague from California, Mr. Denham.
Well, I thank the gentlewoman from Arizona yielding. It was a pleasure to travel to your southern border. I've traveled to the southern border of California many times. And as we saw on the entire border security trip,